Dr. Macro Detectors is the fastest growing manufacturer in the industry, and for good reason. Many detectorists, including Mike Hare, call us the most innovative, but we are so much more than that. We listen to and care about our customers. We also offer a wide range of detectors to fit all of your needs. Come check out all of our products today at www.noctadetectors.com. Detectors for everyone, everywhere, a lifetime.
Welcome to the UK's first metal detection podcast. It's All Metal Mode UK with your host from across the pond, Mr. Michael Hare.
Hello, everybody. This is Mike Hare, and you're listening to the All Metal Mode UK podcast. And don't forget to check out archmdmag.com. Facebook, you can follow us at All Metal Mode Podcast UK. Well, that's there's groups as well. Metal Detecting UK, Dirt Fishing. I think these are all groups. I'll have to double check with Dave. Archaeology and Metal Detecting Magazine, Archaeology and Metal Detecting Group. Don't forget, hey, tell your friends, family, grandparents, strangers. Go up to oh my goodness, I got an idea. First person that goes up to a stranger and can prove that they told them about the show, we will find something to send out to you. How funny would that be, Dave? Anyhow, tell everybody about us. You can find us on Spreaker. You can go to Spreaker. Of course, we're live right now. You can tune in live. You can jump in chat. While we're live, you can, or after we're live, you can listen anytime from Spreaker. You can go download from Spreaker and listen at your convenience or while you're on the move. You can also find us at iTunes, iHeartRadio, YouTube, and even other places. If you Spotify's another one. You know, if you Google All Metal Mode Podcast, All Metal Mode UK, we are all over the place. So many different ways to catch the show. If you are tuning in live and want to jump in the chat, there's once you click on the show, there's a rectangle bar at the bottom. Simply click on that, and then once you do that, you'll see a little chat bubble. If you're new, you will have to log in. However, I think it's very simple. You can log in through Facebook, and you can join us live in chat and have a little conversation with us. So, how's it going, Dave?
Absolutely marvelous. I'm healthy as anything and ready for the show.
Oh, good. You've had a rough couple weeks.
I'm healthy as anything, but the computer issues I had last week have sent the computer to the computer hospital. I've got my wife's laptop and my daughter's laptop and tried to attach my headset, and it hasn't got a microphone jack. So my next thing was to try my hands-free kit, and unfortunately Spreaker won't open on my wife's computer in any way, shape or form. So for the first time ever, I'm using Skype on my mobile phone, so I apologise if I sound like I'm underwater.
Well, you sound better. You definitely sound better than when we first when you first came on. So we will get through this show for sure.
And a very exciting show it is tonight as well.
I've been looking forward to this. You know, when Luke, I think he approached us together and, you know, what do you think about having him on? And I'm like, heck yeah, let's do that. So, sometimes we need a break from metal detecting, I think. I think it's good to throw something a little off subject, off topic in here. But, it's all history.
It is, and we had some good feedback from the people on the All Metal Mode UK podcast group saying now, yeah, definitely. And we've been having some good feedback thereafter as well.
Absolutely. So what do we got for news?
Well, tonight we've got one or two things. I'm not going to go great into depth because obviously this show could run on till midnight. We've got two guests tonight. Firstly, we've got Anthony Blakemore discussing Magfest, and then we've got Carry Galia from the Cloak and Dagger tour in London. Now, news-wise, first and foremost, Mike Smith, he of listener and friend of the show who, excuse me, found the Bronze Chariot down in South Wales. Today he's had a fantastically beautiful Henry VIII Sovereign Penny up with the CTX. So images of that are on the All Metal Mode UK group. Second up this week, absolutely stunning find, a solid gold bishop's ring, which could date back to the reign of Henry VIII or earlier has been discovered on the Isle of Sheppey. It was unearthed by Ashley Solly during a day out with the Medway History Finders. More than 70 detectorists descended on the island as part of the official hunt for lost treasure. And it is stunning, and it's one of those seal rings as well, by the looks of it. So you can actually put it into wax to leave the impression of whoever owned it. It's gone down into the British Museum for authentication, and it looks like it's a one-off in excellent condition. It's been valued at up to £60,000 at the moment. Secondly, if my phone will play the game, there's also been an exciting find in Exeter, and it's some gold, and it's not going to play nice, is it? So I'm going to have to leave that one, unfortunately. As I'm saying, I'm working on my phone at the moment because I had everything opened up before. So basically, there's Exeter, the RAMM, the Royal Albert Memorial Museum. I think that's right, in Exeter, where a good friend of mine, Tony Eccles, is actually the one of the main people at the museum. They've been linked at the moment with acquiring a lot of gold that was found in the area that I will find and probably get back to during the show. But as of now, as I say, I apologise because I'm working through means unknown to me. So, on to our guest for the night, Mike. First up tonight.
Hold on. Before we get there, real quick, okay. I think we need to have something to give away. The first person who shares a recording with us of them going up to a stranger on the street and telling them about All Metal Mode UK.
In fact, I'm sure Luke will have a few bits that he'll be able to put possibly a package of Rootus items together. So I'm pretty sure if they can show us that it's a stranger and it's not just somebody we know, then obviously we'll be able to put something together. Either Luke will have something, or I've got a few bits here probably if I go through the ton of rubbish behind me and I find something there.
Yeah, I think that... Am I wrong? Is that awesome or wrong? Am I just being wrong?
It's not bad.
I think it'd be great. And then I could take the audio out of the video and we could put it in the show too. Need a little video of strangers.
Video, a nice video, and put that on the All Metal Mode UK podcast Facebook group. First one up, go out in the street now, accost somebody walking a dog, video it, get it on there.
Absolutely. Okay, go ahead, Dave. Sorry.
So, tonight's first guest, it's one of the organisers of Magfest, Anthony Blakemore. And Anthony, sure, I'll tell you all about Magfest and the. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hello there. We had this idea of doing a magnet fishing event, the first ever weekend magnet fishing event. We wanted to make it something like detectable. That that's a big thing for detectorists, and there wasn't really nothing at all for magnet fishermen and women. So we came up with this idea. Me and my friend Sam Booth, his Facebook group's Dipper Dudes, and we're going to hold the events every year, different parts of the country. This time we're holding it actually down in the Midlands, Dudley in the West Midlands. And it's going to be different parts of the country every year.
So how many people, obviously, unfortunately, that was supposed to be very, very coming up very soon. Unfortunately, you've had to put that on the back burner for the moment because of private issues with one of your colleagues.
That's right. We heard this morning that Sam's grandfather had passed away. It's supposed to be this weekend. So we've had to cancel the event this weekend and put it back to a later date.
Condolences, obviously, at the show for that.
Do you have a new date yet, or is it
not at this stage? We're looking the beginning of September now, but people can keep an eye out for it on my Facebook page, Black Country Magnetised, and Sam's page, which is Dipper Dudes Adventures.
Okay, great.
Just writing that down as we speak, and we'll give that a shout out at the end of the show. So that was Black Country Digger Dudes, and
it's Black Country Magnetised.
Sorry, Black Country Magnetised. I got it mixed up there, haven't I?
Yeah, and Dipper Dudes Adventures.
Dipper Dudes Adventures.
Anthony, make sure you let one of us know when you have a date, and we'll start announcing it on the podcast every week leading up to it.
That's brilliant, Mike.
Now,
so how many people were you actually expected to be at this event, the first one?
The first event, we're looking at around 60 to 80 people that have actually put the names down for it. But we've also going to be catering for children. We really want to try and get the children involved. I mean, everything's been paid for out of my own pocket and Sam's pocket. We've putting trophies on. There's going to be competitions over the 2 days, but we've really focused on the children, getting them off the PlayStations and everything, basically, getting them outside doing activities. So it's a good opportunity for those as well.
Well, as listeners know, I've got a 6-year-old who absolutely adores magnet fishing. Bothers me constantly to go out. So, I take it you'll be having token events?
Yes, well, what we're actually going to do, we will set up a bit for junior magnet fishermen and girls, and we actually attach coins to different coloured lollipop sticks.
Right.
Each different lollipop stick is worth different points, so they'll pull them out, and after a few hours, we'll tot them up, and there you've got your winners. But as I say, we're trying to get as many children there as possible, and we're trying to give each child or go away with something.
That's a great idea. I love it. Get these kids off their iPods and phones and everything else and video games. Get them outside. That's a great thing.
That's it.
So going off topic, away from the event itself, you've been doing it for a number of years now, personally.
Yeah, I've been doing it for just under 2 years now. I same as listening to That's Brad earlier on. Brad was actually supposed to be coming down this weekend as well, but I'm sure Brad will come down to the when we've sorted out the new date. Just started watching YouTube videos, got into it. There's loads and loads, hundreds and hundreds of miles of canals in the West Midlands. And you can literally just walk down any street and you'll find a canal. So for me, actually living in the Midlands now, it was brilliant.
So obviously with a lot of people attending the event itself,
yeah,
Is there actually any permission needed from local authorities to have that many people in that area?
Yeah, we've had permission granted off the local council because we're actually camping. We've set up, we're going to have overnight camping there as well. And we've actually got a permission off the local council for that. And we after we finished the magnet fishing, we've got people that's going to take away all the scrap metal, and so we've thought of everything really.
Brilliant.
Absolutely, Anthony. But before you go, tell us about some of your favorite finds, magnet fishing.
Ooh. Personal favourite finds. I've had guns. I've had a nice. You might like this one, not Mike. A Gerber bushcraft knife.
Oh, cool.
Still in its sheath. Saves, the usual things that come out. A friend of you last month. You've probably heard of his name, Scott Argood, Crazy Family Magnet. Pulled a bag of jewellery out. He also had 2 gold watches. That was an exciting find for him as well. There's just too much to mention, really.
Yeah,
gotcha. Very cool.
Very cool. We've a good friend of the show, Gareth Breyer, Drastic G's been on before, and obviously discussed it at length, everything that he's done. So, if you wouldn't mind, we'd obviously like to invite you back to the show in the future to go a bit more in depth and obviously discuss the event after it occurs and what's been found and whatnot. So, if you're up for that would be brilliant.
That's great idea. Great idea.
I agree. It'd be great to have you on after the event and let us know how it went. And yeah, that'd be great.
Brilliant, Mike. Yeah, I will do, mate.
Okay, good. I think we better get going, get on Carrie here and get this conversation going. Anthony, thank you for your time. Again, please reach out to one of us or Luke or Dave, myself. Let us know when you figure out when it's going to be rescheduled. We'll keep announcing it for you, and we wish you luck. And what a great thing to be doing, cleaning up the canals, sharing this experience with the kids. Wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, all the best. Well done.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
You're more than welcome. Speak soon.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye. So, Mike, one thing that he's just mentioned there was Detectable. And obviously, myself and Luke will be attending Detectable as part of the Archaeology Detecting magazine. And we've got a stall there and at the Rogney Cup Memorial. So, obviously, we're both very, very excited. And I'm getting more and more excited. And, you can't be there. But one of the things that has occurred, obviously, we've both been very busy. I've been doing one side of it and Luke's been putting the magazines together. And we're actually, over the next couple of weeks, at the Rodney Cook Memorial Rally and at Detectable, releasing, I can't remember what the word is now, my head's just gone blank, issue 3 and 4 of the Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine. So issue 3 will be released at the Rodney Cook Memorial. We've gone off to printers last night. And tomorrow, 2 more editions will be going to print as well. And that will be a special, which is a Mine Lab Detectable special program, which is obviously produced by ourselves, which will be free again. And that'll be in the goodie bags of everybody that attends the event. And also, issue 4 will be out the same day. So over 2 weeks, we've got 3 issues of the Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine coming out. All done. Very hard work by Luke. All free. They've been paid for by advertising, as last year's were. And I can't wait to hold them in my hand because it's a totally new look as opposed to last year. And I know how hard, obviously, Luke's job is taking up a hell of a lot of time at the moment. And I know how much effort he's put into this, so we can't wait for this to be out.
Are you shaving, or is there a bee in the room? What's that noise?
Nothing.
It sounds like a bee or something's buzzing around you. You're shaving. It's funny. Hey,
Why on earth David while I'm on the show, Michael?
Right, I know. I'm just kidding, obviously. Hey, I do want to say, though, some people have mentioned asking when we're going to do the all-metal mode hunt. And I've thought about, this just actually hit me the other day. If you and Luke loved me, you would put that event together. You guys would buy me a ticket. Look, I don't need fancy. I don't care if they'll strap me to the landing gear. I'll fly that way. I mean, I would think we could get a cheap seat on the landing gear, and I'd fly over and we'd have a big hunt. I don't know if you and Luke love me. I'm gonna be wondering about that now.
Well, we certainly, it's been considered. The options have been considered, but they're actually putting one on. Obviously, other things are taking precedence at the moment. We've got multiple things going on behind the scenes of the magazine. And it's something, obviously, the listeners have asked about it. And it's we need to go away. We need to find a location. We need to speak to people who also would like to be involved from the NCMD, for instance, potentially LP, people coming along with different stalls. So it's something that we need to look at, and we will be looking at. Hopefully, at the start of 2020, we'll be able to put things a little bit more effort into doing so. And you never know, we might even invite you.
Right? Maybe. I'm only kidding. I know how busy you guys are. I'm busy. I'd love to come over sometime and hunt with you guys and meet all of our as many listeners and then guests that we've had. I just can't wait. And we just keep getting more and more guests on and stuff and listeners. And I'm like, well, there's more people I got to meet now. Now I'm going to have to do this Cloak and Dagger tour, obviously, if I come over someday.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. And a nice segue there into tonight's guest. Tonight we have Carry Galia from the Cloak and Dagger tour, which is based in London. So, good evening, Carry.
Good evening, guys. Nice to be on.
And do apologise for making you wait.
Yeah, no worries. No, it's been good. I've been intrigued and following on the conversation. It's been good. Especially amazed at what's going on with the Bronze Chariot. There's been everything that's been explored into that. I still need to listen to the rest of your podcast because I was listening to it today when I was pottering around the house, and I still want to kind of explore more into that because it's a fascinating find.
Oh, it certainly is, and Mike will be on again soon, no doubt, because more of the information that was the things that weren't allowed to be said are now allowed to be said. So we're hoping to be able to get Mike on soon and tell us everything, really.
Brilliant. We've got the inside scoop. This is sounding even more exciting as it goes on.
It certainly is.
Of course, everything's going to be in stark contrast compared to him because obviously Mike is, phenomenal what he does and everything. Is absolutely amazing finds. But I very much feel that I'm going to be, I suppose, if he's a kind of Michelangelo in terms of quality, I'm like a weird, dirty mural graffiti sketch in comparison.
I like you already. Your analogies are fantastic.
Yeah, well, actually, to keep it historic, I can be one of those really overly vulgar graffiti art that you find in some Roman remains. So I'll be one of those. Something really
like
disgusting and horrid.
Baldric with intelligence.
Yeah, and Well, I don't know. Don't give me that much credit. I mean, don't forget. I mean, Baldric the man's done well. I mean, look at Time Team. He's definitely done well for himself.
Certainly has.
Yeah, just took a few centuries, and he's gotten and learned enough. So yeah.
So, tell us about the Cloak and Dagger tours. I personally hadn't heard of it until Luke told us about it the other week. Obviously, I've been looking into it thereafter. But please introduce yourself to the listeners.
All right. So the Cloak and Dagger tour is run with me and my other colleagues. It's very much a darker, horrible, disgusting, offensive, just everything imaginable tour. So at least you know that the history that you're getting in, we're not sugarcoating any of it or romanticizing it. So if there's any, I don't know, tourism drops in London, you know who to blame. But we do things a little bit differently. So we focus very much on as much local history as possible. We're very dedicated into the idea that we want people to be able to see and touch and feel the history that they're actually in, rather than just going on a kind of little wander. We want to kind of paint a picture of what the past was really like. So we explore focusing on the history of more ordinary people, the kind of common folk, rather than focusing on the history of great celebrities. We kind of paint a picture of kind of quotidian life and all of the horrors and, you know, awfulness that all entailed. We all do that around, at the moment, our tour is around London Bridge. But where we're really different is we actually end the night after the tour with a show. We have these professional actors. The tour begins and ends in the George Inn.
Oh, hold on one second, guys. I apologize. Luke told me to tell everybody, you know, this show is going to get graphic. It's going to be R-rated. If you have children, I am so sorry. I meant to announce that right from the start.
Yeah, if you've got little kiddies, run away now. Keep them safe. Keep their innocence.
Get your kids off the show. You don't want to hear this.
Just lock them outside. They'll be safer.
Yes, lock them. Well, I don't. Out in the shed's probably safer. Go lock them in the shed. And yeah.
Yeah, just be prepared.
I'm so sorry to jump in like that, but go ahead.
No, absolutely. No. I mean, the more warnings about how horrible and and by extension the touring experience is, the better. But how we're different. So we go this horrible, disgusting history tour, and you know, when people are starting to feel a bit sick, we come back to the George Inn, very important pub, very important inn for London's history. And then we actually have a show. We have this room booked at the George, where with these two actors recreate a true story of murder and revenge that actually happened there 300 years ago. So what we do is we kind of explore the area, explore the history, kind of get to the grips of the reality of what ordinary life was really like there. And then at the end of that, we see all of that just come to life. That's the summary of the tour. Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I accidentally muted mine. I apologize.
Oh, right, okay. I was worried that I'd left you too much in a shock, and I was like, oh god, we haven't even gone into the disgusting details.
No, I am.
If you're already backing away now, this is definitely the wrong place to be.
There isn't any shock value here, believe me.
Yeah. There isn't any what, sorry?
Shock value here. You won't get no shock. Don't worry about that.
All right, good. All right, no worries. Well, I'll let all holes unbarred.
Mike's a hillbilly anyway, so you can imagine what goes on there.
Well, I mean, to be fair, archaeologists have got kind of no holdbacks in terms of being prudish. I mean, there was the 18th century digs around in Greece. It's one of my favorite things about archaeologists. A friend of mine, good friend of mine, Sebastian Archer. Little shout out to him there. He's a classicist, and we were talking a while ago about some friends of his that were coming in. They were archaeologists, and we were talking about these old digs in the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century that were going on in Greece. And one of the shocking things about going around in Greece sometimes, if anyone's been in the kind of more isolated country, is that you'll suddenly find these kind of statues of Herma, which traditionally are usually kind of, statue of like an iconic individual's head bust on top of a pillar. But the first Herma were actually just statues of just stone penises that marked boundary markers between different city-states in ancient Greece. And you can still see some of them in quite good condition in the south of Italy and in Sicily. And if only we could actually have a tour there, then we could explore in a completely different avenue direction. But obviously, this is something that was all uncovered by archaeologists. So if that a lot has survived it there, you guys are definitely not going to be shying away from the stuff I'm going to do.
No, we're good.
So,
bring it on.
Historically, how did the Cloak and Dagger tours begin?
Well, actually, the concept of the show was the first thing that came out. So I know the family personally, and the story, the true story, was passed down the generations of the families. They're the descendants of actually one of the characters that we portray in the show. And this family story is kind of been passed down the generations. And I knew the family personally. They'd seen some of my work before. I've worked in history tourism before as well, working with tours, designing tours. And I've also got a background in theatre as well. And they asked if I could do something with this story, if I could write a script for it and maybe do like a fringe show, which was the original plan. But the more we kind of went into the history, the actual story of it itself, its historic content, the backdrop it's set in, because it's set in the 18th century. The actual date of the event, let's call it, happened in, from what we are best able to guess, is actually 1756. We're not exactly sure which month. We know it was that year. And we kind of explore that. But because of the very human element that comes with the show, I'm not giving any spoilers because I don't want to spoil the history, because I want you guys to come on the tour. It explores a lot of themes that I felt a lot of people coming on to this kind of show would just miss or not really appreciate the context of. So what I did was I decided, okay, well, we can make this like a fully immersive experience. Designed the history tour around the area that the show is actually set, and which is Southwark, which has got some phenomenal history in that area, which sadly is very kind of rarely explored. And it's something that is absolutely phenomenal place. Plus, I mean, Southwark was an absolutely atrocious place to be living in. So there's a lot of rich, sordid details about Southwark for a very long time. So we designed a tour to then match with some of the themes that the show actually unveils. And so we end up with this like really extreme contrast where there's the tour that's horrible, disgusting, but it's quite funny. And then the show, which is very viscerally realistic. We even had a choreographed knife fight, because that happened in the story, where one of the characters tries to kill the other. And it was so realistic, we had to actually dumb it down 3 times because it looked too real. It was shocking people so much.
Huh. Interesting.
Now, you mentioned Fringe, and I asked you earlier in the evening. You took part in the Edinburgh Fringe Festival last year.
Yes, we did. So a couple of people that do some of the organisation for some of the different venues, Sweet Venues is the name of the company. Some of them and some of the people and other contacts they had actually come to see the tour. And this wonderful lady called Stefania Boccicchio, who's she is the director of Draper Hall, which is a kind of community theatre not too far from Elephant and Castle. She also works with the Fringe, one of the kind of main journalists that's out there, has got a lot of contacts, does a lot of the organisation for many different shows and many different venues. She just happened to come on the tour one night and immediately said, you need to come to the Fringe. There's nothing like this up there. You really need to come up. This is definitely the kind of thing that would be really good for you. You need to do it. And I said no, because it would involve a lot of work, a lot more than I already had. But then after convincing me, after a while, we did. And what we did was we designed a new tour to fit in with the history of Edinburgh and maintained it in this kind of interactive and then immersive quality with the theatrical aspect as well. And it was kind of a big experiment, but it went relatively well. We got some really good reviews, and we even got a BBC Radio London interview as well when we were up there. And the more important thing is that we taught a lot of people a lot of grotesque and horrible, disgusting history. Unfortunately, we didn't go as hard as to make anybody throw up, which is our little gem medal, because on our tour so far in London, we've had 2 people throw up on the tour, which is absolutely wonderful. But actually, points to the first person who threw up, this lovely lady, Canadian actually, this lovely girl. She threw up halfway through the tour, couldn't deal with the history, but she did come back after the tour was ended to come and see the show. So points to her, she definitely gets credit for that one. So just in case she's listening right now.
That's the first time I've heard that one, to be honest. I've been on multiple tours in the past. I practiced parapsychology for a number of years, so I've been on tours not dissimilar in a way. Obviously, the theatrical aspect and the historical aspect and the storytelling and whatnot. Yours is obviously a lot different. This is a paranormal, let's say, could be classed as has it really taken place? But what you're doing has taken place. It is history. It is in the history books.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How many people actually work for your company for the Cloak and Dagger tours?
Oh, let's see. So I'll tell you. I'll give a shout out to my whole little cast. There's obviously me, Ray Kalia, who's actually I've got a phenomenal cast of actors, absolutely brilliant. Ray and Felix, they're 2 of our old boys. They've been with us for a while now. And then we have Lota and Kelsey and who am I missing? Terry, our newest cast member. Phenomenal actors, absolutely obsessed with history, and just a little testament of why I'm so lucky to have the team that I do. Ray and Felix have both been working with the company for quite a while now. Felix just come back from Russia, actually. He was doing a theatre training course out in Russia, and he's just coming back now. And a little while ago, Ray came up to me and had bought an entire series of books on the Jacobites, because very strangely, we actually touch on a tiny bit of Jacobite history on the tour, but I'm not going to unveil any more because I want to leave a little bit of mystery.
You got to tell us something. You got to tell us something.
I'm sure, Mike, we'll be able to move towards some areas that aren't included in the tour, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of one of those sad elements. I mean, you guys will know yourselves that anytime if you're trying to write a thesis or an essay, or you're trying to do anything in terms of content, whether it's an essay thesis or a tour or a talk or absolutely anything, you'll have so many of these amazing subjects and so many of these incredible details that you want to cover, but you realize that if you do that, it's either going to take an entire novel or an entire day's worth of talking, and it's just not possible. So I don't even know how much information and stuff I've actually omitted from the tour. Some of the things we don't do anymore, for example, we used to do the Great Peasants' Revolt of 1381. We used to cover that because the actual revolt, when they stormed London, they crossed London Bridge. So we would kind of be there on site, pointing towards the direction and covering all the history behind that. And because, like I said, we do cover a lot of kind of ordinary history, ordinary people's history. And as the peasants, the serfs, the very bottom rung of society, obviously we touch a bit on them whenever we go through the medieval period of the tour. We talk about kind of peasant life, serf life. And we used to do that, but it just new research comes up, we discover new things, we adapt the tour, and unfortunately you have to end up cutting some things. And despite it being horrific and terrible, and I mean, maybe not all terrible. I mean, the Peasant Army did actually storm London and apparently burnt all the law books and actually killed a huge number of lawyers. So I mean, that in itself is probably the most honest thing that's ever happened in the city of London. I mean, well, sort of mobility and all that. But yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't horrible enough. Because we've got a theme on the tour. Further on you go, the worse things actually get. So if there's ever a point in the tour that you think you can't handle anymore, yeah, it's going to get worse.
I like that. That's a good plan. Good plan.
You got to have a build up of information, haven't you? Yeah. But all right. There's actually one thing I recently found out. I'm not entirely sure because the article itself, it wasn't sourced. And do you guys know the great medieval chronicler Geoffroy Froissart documented a lot of the 100 Years' War. He wrote. He was kind of obviously born in the kind of period of a lot of the wars that he actually covers between kind of 13, 14. I think he died in 14. Was it 1410? I believe. But one of the really amazing things about Froissart is that he actually wrote in detail, not just about the 100 Years' War, but about a lot of the places that he visited. So when you actually read his chronicles, there's some amazing details about some of the places that he got to visit, as well as a lot of the details of how horrible and brutal the 100 Years' War was, with the chevauchée and all these different events. But in this article I was reading about him, because apparently he, when he returned from France, the first place he landed in was Southwark, which I'm not entirely sure is completely substantiated. But what this article said was absolutely wonderful, absolutely brilliant. And it said that apparently, because he was very famous for anywhere that he went to visit, he would always write something in his chronicle or in his journals. He'd always write something in detail about what he saw and the place he found. He was very much a kind of adventurer. And when he came to Southwark, bearing in mind, he'd just come back from witnessing the 100 Years' War that was still raging in France. When he came to Southwark, apparently didn't write anything. He just put in an entry in his journal just saying, "Don't go." I'm not sure if it's actually substantiated because I can't seem to find the primary source for that. But if it's true, it's absolutely amazing. And Southwark was probably the worst place in England, which is quite a statement, especially in medieval history. The conditions in life there were absolutely terrible. I'm not sure, actually, do you guys know anything about Southwark's history and to an extent?
Not me.
Ish.
So say again?
Ish. Mike
Ish.
said not me.
Oh, yeah, ish. Well, obviously, Southwark's quite famous because, Chaucer, obviously, it's the Tabard Inn, which is actually used to be connected to the George Inn. It's the old inn that used to be connected down from it. That's where the three pilgrims meet in the Canterbury Tales. Dickens used to visit the place a lot. He used to actually visit the George specifically. So it has these very prominent individuals, but it also seems to be the staging point for pretty much every single one of the major rebellions that attacked the city of London. We got Wat Tyler and Jack Cade, and you've got all these rebels, and they all seem to set themselves up across the river from Southwark. But the poverty was just horrible, just destitutely poor, especially for the time, even for the time as well. But obviously one of the big issues is that Southwark was a terrible place to build anything. It was atrociously bad. Lambeth, the area of Lambeth, is basically all moorland. So it's all bogs and swamps and quagmire. So even today, everything that Southwark is built onto on that top of that part of London, under the ground, it's all still swamp. So there's loads of issues of instability in the land, which carry on to this day, actually. But back then, there wasn't anything like the Thames Barrier. The Thames wasn't really controlled in terms of its tides. And while the north embankment of the River Thames is quite stable because it kind of goes uphill, the south bank of the river is definitely not, and was very prone to very consistent flooding. So Southwark was just a terrible idea to build anything there because it was constantly flooding. You couldn't expand out very much because it was all swampland, which also meant that you couldn't really develop any major agriculture into the area. So, if you're a peasant, the chances are that you're going to have to be a farmer if you're going to make any kind of living. But you can't be, but you're stuck in this city. And it's very freedom of movement. So you're just kind of stuck there in this endless cycle of just poverty and extremism. And then what ends up happening is it becomes rife with crime because the ports become very successful, and it becomes this whole domino effect of just disgusting, horrible conditions that all wraps into the wonderful place that is Southwark today.
Interesting.
So, what is your background originally? History student, anything like that? Where did your background come from with your interest in history?
I've always been the really geeky kid at the back of the class, just like nose in a book that, probably supposed to be studying maths, but instead I'm, reading up on the Civil War. No, my background actually it was initially with theatre. I was studying in York and doing the acting course there, and but I had done some little work previously in museums, and a lot of the theatre work I'd done previously was all historically based. And I suppose it's a kind of weird moment of destiny, actually, because there's a fantastic company up in York where I was studying called York Walk. Absolutely brilliant tour company. And the owner at the time, Warwick, he's unfortunately passed away. He was put out a kind of roll call for getting in new tour guides. Now, the requirement on the announcement for this post was to have a degree in history or be studying currently, but it was recommended for you to have a master's or some kind of specialization, even a PhD, which I didn't have. But what I did have was that I was bilingual. So he saw my CV, saw that I was bilingual. So he thought, okay, he's studying to be an actor. He can just read a script. I can stick him on a bus. He can point at stuff. And that's it. I'm not going to make him into a tour guide. I'm just going to give him that role. But after our interview, which was supposed to be 10 minutes, it ended up becoming the entire afternoon. We talked about absolutely everything. I think most of the topic of conversation was actually about the Italian merchant republics and their foundations of the banking system and monetary capitalism that ended up spreading throughout Europe, and a lot of the different kind of banking systems and the kind of stuff they would actually have. Like, for example, how bank today in London, it actually comes from the old Italian word banco, which means stall, because the merchants would set up stalls for money lending, and that's where you actually get it through, and that's kind of the first international banking system. So, yeah, I'm not going to lie, boring beyond belief to the vast majority of people, but it was a fascinating topic of conversation. I think after that, he kind of realized he's wasted enough of his life in books to know something about what he's talking about. And he actually hired me as a full-fledged guide. He took me under his wing, he trained me up, and after a little while, I started working with other companies as well, freelance, and I started even designing tours. And then I moved down to London because apparently acting pays more than history, which is quite a depressing statement.
Mm.
Yeah, and
the rest is history.
Let's say again.
And the rest is history.
And the rest is history, as they say, yeah.
And history still.
And hopefully history in the making.
I'm going to move on because I know all and sundry are waiting to hear the 18 plus. The R-rated if you're in America.
Oh, yeah, all right.
Now, obviously, you know what we're going to end up asking you. In fact, I'm going to ask it first because Michael know it in America, and generally the population, most of the world who know about British history will know about Jack the Ripper.
Yeah, of course.
So, does Jack the Ripper come into anywhere in your tour?
No. No, we don't. We did that for a specific reason. One, Southwark is such an atrociously horrible place in history that even though Jack the Ripper never actually made face there in Southwark, it was so bad that if you actually look at many of the Victorian warning signs about Jack the Ripper and stay indoors, stay in late, when it said, places to avoid, make sure you avoid, Whitechapel and the rest of it. One of the places that would always list to avoid was Southwark, even though he never turned up there because it was just rife with crime, that despicably bad in terms of murder rates, that it was just a genuine good general practice to just avoid Southwark whenever possible. Because it was that bad. It was the hotbed of crime throughout British history. Throughout most of English history, it was actually, you could very easily describe it as the crime capital. It's also the first place that we seem to find historically organized criminal syndicates as well, which we'll expand on in a little bit. But to answer your question, no, we don't concentrate on Jack the Ripper because there is far worse than that man in a lot of the tour, and a lot of the elements of the tour that we actually talk about.
Oh, that's where I want to go. Yeah, tell us what's worse.
What's worse? All right. So I'm trying to think of subjects that we don't actually cover in the tour to give more people reasons to come, but a lot of juicy content maybe from things that I've researched before. So there was a famous individual called the Corpse King, operated in Southwark. His name escapes me at the moment. It'll probably pop into my mind in a little bit. But he was famously known as the Corpse King. I'm sure if you Google this, you'll be able to find any details. And I'd be surprised if there isn't a Wikipedia page about him. The Corpse King is world renowned because they were during the Victorian era, obviously with the great resurgence of scientific method and medicinal practices. One of the big issues that a lot of doctors and especially surgeons had was being able to perform autopsies to discover and learn more about the human anatomy. So the Corpse King made a living by stealing bodies from cemeteries, and they would sell them to the old operating theatre, which is just down the road, actually, from where we start the tour, the George, just on St. Thomas High Street. And they used to sell them on to make quite a pretty penny by getting all these corpses and digging them out. And apparently they used to hire the gangs in the areas, and they would be they would always have a thug apparently outside a funeral parlor waiting for when the horse and carriage would go out, and then they would just follow it and then give a signal, find out where the person was buried, and then just dig them out so they were still nice and juicy, nice and fresh to then sell them on. So that's one little detail.
So they weren't dissimilar to Burke and Hare.
Well, obviously, yeah, some of those, yeah, but I think Burke and Hare, there was a certain level of kind of altruism with what they were doing, because a lot of what they did was they would sell specifically to doctors and surgeons. But what's famous about the Corpse King is that he literally sold bodies. So, yes, the operating theatre would definitely buy them, but they weren't the only people actually buying these bodies.
What else would you need a body for? Yeah. Do I want to know?
You don't want to actually explore that in further detail. But that's one element. Actually, there's another thing that's fascinating to talk into more modern aspects. A lot of things that are kind of coming into sway now actually connects quite interestingly now. I was given a book recently, a fantastic little history book. It's kind of got a summary of LGBT history, kind of homosexuality through time. It's written by a man called Peter Ackroyd. It's called Queer City. It's a fantastic read. It's got loads of aspects, all the way from the Romans and all the way to kind of modern time. But there's a little part of it that I discovered that talks about Southwark, and it talks about these two prostitutes that actually used to always hang out outside the local hospital, St. Thomas Hospital. And while they were there, they were always outside the hospital because they always needed to get mercury tablets because they constantly were infected with syphilis. They had to always be hanging out outside the hospital, conveniently grabbing clients, but then also conveniently grabbing the mercury tablets to be fighting against the syphilis. Now, what's interesting about these two prostitutes called Mary and Sally is that they were actually transvestites, and they self-identified as women. So it might be an early example of transsexuality in history. And there were these two prostitutes, and there's a chance that the kind of derogatory word, the kind of offensive term for someone being gay, was like a Mary, like someone's a Mary. There's a good chance it actually came from one of the two prostitutes. Because apparently they were very, very popular. So good on them. They definitely made a good pretty penny. Hopefully, before their actual minds literally turn to rot. Because syphilis is a really, really underrated disease as to how incredibly horrible it actually is. I think
not what Al Capone died of.
Yes.
Yeah, it supposedly died. No, didn't he die of pneumonia, I think? But he was infected with syphilis before he died. I know that. Which is weird as well, because I think by that point there were treatments for it. I think, but syphilis is just horrible. Quite honestly, I think I would prefer to be infected with leprosy, because it's the same thing, but just more intense and so much worse. And at least with leprosy you die, but with syphilis you go mad as your brain literally starts to turn to mush. So if the little public warning message for our listeners, make sure you wear protection, because you never know if you might end up encountering a surely lovely person like Mary and Sally, but you never really know what they're carrying.
Fun times there.
Hey, we're nearly we're nearly at 9 o'clock in the UK, Mike. So that's the watershed. So I'm sure we can get a little bit more graphic shortly.
Oh, brilliant! Okay, there we go. 5 minutes time, and then we're gonna start to unveil the floodgates.
18 plus tonight's show. If you got young ones around, lock them in the shed. I think that's what we agreed was best.
Shed, lock them outside, put them up in the attic. Just go full on Oliver Twist Dickensian when it comes to treatment because it's for their own good. Stick them with a bowl of gruel. Tell them how they're lucky they're not working in a factory, and tell them to stop crying.
Yeah, working in a factory like me.
Oh, do you work in a factory?
I work at JCB. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, perfect. Well, to be fair, at least you can be thankful that now we have like health and safety standards. Well, back in the height of the industrial era, it was like, oh, what are you 4 years old? You got tiny fingers. All right, stick your hand in that giant moving piece of steel and try not to get your arm chopped off because we really need to get those little scraps of cotton. It's really important, Timmy. Come on.
Yes, thankfully things have changed since that time. Correct.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Actually, here's a little question for you guys. Because as I'm sure most people that kind of work in any kind of history background or have any kind of interest in history, you always get saddled with that question of what time period would you most prefer to live in? Like, where would you love to live? So, what about you guys? What would your answer be to that question? If you could choose any point in time, where would you choose to live?
I think personally it'd be ancient Egypt, just so I can see how they did move the blocks. About all the preamble and theory, just to see what actually happens.
Yeah, that's a good answer actually. Yeah, because it's still somewhat of a mystery, isn't it? And then obviously we're looking at you look at the pyramids like up in Machu Picchu as well, and some of those gigantic stone slabs that even today on those kind of peaks we wouldn't be able to do it, not without some special new technique that we'd have to invent, but with current methods, we just wouldn't be capable. So how do they do it?
Certainly. Yeah. Mike, what's yours?
Probably when the Roman orgies were at the height of. That's
good choice. Good choice.
Yes.
I like that. Slipping in an orgy 3 minutes before the watershed. That's quite risque. Well done.
Mine'd be with pigs, so it'd be a porgy.
Yeah. Well, whatever.
Well, I'm sure you'd want to do that on a purely anthropological mindset, wouldn't you?
Of course.
Obviously, you're not going to be getting involved. You just want to be able to see the actual culture at work. That's what you're really wanting to go.
Yeah, let's go with that.
That's brilliant. Well, actually, there's a phenomenal. I can't remember where it actually is. I don't think it's in Herculaneum. I don't think it is. I think it might actually be in a villa in Turkey. But there's an absolutely beautiful, perfectly preserved alfresco painting, Roman alfresco painting, and it's of Phallus, the great god of you know what. I'll reserve that because it's 2 minutes to go. What's amazing about this alfresco painting is we all kind of, I think people romanticize a lot about kind of civilizations, especially ancient civilizations. When you think of Egypt and you think of the Great Pyramids, and you think of China and you think of the Great Wall, you think of Rome and you think of the Colosseum and aqueducts and the roads, but we kind of forget how like ridiculously vulgar and just obsessed and just really, really dirty the Romans really were. I mean, the orgy is just like one example, but there's this phenomenal alfresco painting. It was beautiful. It was, as they were uncovering it, they found this like perfectly preserved, and obviously he's very much an Adonis figure, perfect. And they were, when they were cleaning off from the mural to try and get to this alfresco painting, they got down to the waist, and they noticed that there was something really strange, because when they were clearing away the waist, it seemed like he was like sitting down in midair, because you could see his legs kind of stretched out. And they thought that was weird, so they think, oh, is he floating? Have we discovered some kind of new discovery? So as they were clearing it, it went on and on and on, this huge stretch of leg, and then it came to the end, and they found all this scaffolding that seemed to be like holding it up. And they said, that's weird. Carried on cleaning it, and then they discovered it wasn't actually a leg at all. It was a giant, 1 minute away, a giant phallus, a giant penis that was just stuck out, hung up by cranes in this alfresco painting, and then they found the legs underneath. So Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got to do something before porn, haven't you? So.
We are seconds out. I'm getting a little bit. We're getting there real quick.
Yeah, we're getting there. There we go. Oh, and here we are. Okay.
There we are.
Of the night.
Right. Let's stop there and say, Carrie, let's talk graphically.
Yeah.
Tell us one of your graphic tales.
What are the graphic tales?
Cut everything out and start right now.
All right, right now. Let's see, what can I tell you? Let's talk a little bit about, actually, something that we can touch on quite a lot that you'll actually find very commonly around England especially. But also, Mike, you might actually find it where you're at. Actually, just a question. Whereabouts in the States are you at?
I'm in Texas.
Oh, you're in Texas. So you won't find this where you're at. But you find these dotted all over. Anthony, have you noticed when you go to certain older cities, you find a lot of very kind of common street names that get used? Because as I'm sure you guys know, street names were very functional in terms of their actual name choice, their title choice. So if you find a street called Stonegate, which is actually Stonegarter, because Garter was the obviously the Old English, the Saxon and the Celtic word for street, which is what people think gate, but it's not actually gate, it's Gata. And stone is where it passed up, so it was the road for stone. So usually you'd find a big cathedral or a big tower or something that was there, and then the main road to bring up the stone to build it. Now you tend to find Stonegate, and that's one example. But two others that you tend to find very commonly are grape and lady, that you find around a lot of cities, especially throughout England. And you can find them dotted around, always in an older city, always in the centre of what would be an old city. Have you guys ever come across those, like Grape Lane, Lady Lane, Grape Alley, those kind of places?
Yeah.
Do you know the history behind them?
Unfortunately not.
Unfortunately not. Well, unfortunately, you're going to find out, and after you find out, you're never going to be able to unhear it again. So they're actually aliases. The original names of the streets were actually so incredibly offensive they couldn't be allowed to be kept in the public eye. And what they were the red light districts. They were actually, so the two aliases, Grape and Lady, were connecting onto the thing. From what Lady is obviously very direct. It's a very kind of passive way of kind of like a little hint, a little wink as to what's going on. Grape is actually because of a typical characteristic of courtesans of quality in the 18th and 19th centuries. If you were looking for a lady of leisure of a somewhat more higher quality than you'd normally find, a signal that you would give would be holding a bunch of grapes to kind of showcase the kind of quality of the lady that you're looking for. So if you found someone that looked to be of a higher quality, then you would offer them grapes, and that would be a signal in terms of this is what you're actually looking for. Which is why you tend to find a lot of places around, even a lot of pubs as well, that tend to be connected onto alleyways that are usually called like, the grapevine or bunch of grapes and that kind of thing. But they were the prostitution alleys. They were alleys. Now, we are past the watershed.
Yes, we are.
But the name of this street is so bad, I'm not even sure if I can actually say the full name. So I'll bleep.
No, you have to.
No,
it's the law.
We're going to go off the rails tonight. We can mark the show as explicit. So I want to see how far we can take it. Look, right. If we have one person left in chat by the end of the night, you haven't done your job. Until you've ran everybody out.
Challenge accepted. Yeah. All right. Then. So, the idea was they had to replace the street names. It was far too offensive. And they came with these two aliases, Grape and Lady, which connected somewhat to them. Because you can't just... I mean, the idea was that all history has to be preserved. So you can't just destroy history. So instead, the aliases were created to replace the original names. So, for our listeners, if you know the aliases, which is Grape and Lady, and it's near an alleyway or where an old alleyway used to pass, the original name, unfortunately, wasn't actually Grape or Lady. The original name was Grope Cunt Lane. And these were...
There we go.
There it is.
There we go.
First bad word of the night, and it's a big one. Grope Cunt Lane, which obviously I understand some people might be getting offended right now. But you have to understand that actually then, when these street names were named, it wasn't actually considered offensive at all. It wasn't. It wasn't even considered vulgar in terms of language. It was actually considered very technical and refined. Actually quite academic in terms of its use of language. And the word cunt actually just descends from the Latin, which is just cunus, which is just vagina. And that's the actual root of the word. So it's actually quite academic in terms of its use of language, because Latin was the language of academics. So the fact that you actually use that in terms of their street names wasn't actually meant to be offensive. If you wanted to be offensive with the exact same meaning, what you'd actually say is quim. Because that was the old quim, which I noticed is actually very cheeky, because I've noticed a lot of modern movies recently have been cheekily just kind of inserting that word into characters that of a more archaic disposition and might call someone just a full-on quim. And I'm the only person in the cinema looking at this going, whoa, what? Hang on a second, did they actually use that? And no one notices because nobody knows. So spread the message out.
Quimby in The Simpsons.
The what, sorry?
Mayor Quimby in The Simpsons.
Yeah, I mean, I think that might be a little nod because he's clearly an absolute quim. So I think there's that. But also I noticed it's actually in one of the Marvel movies as well. In the I think it's in the Avengers. And Loki,
when
yes.
You're teaching me words that I have to write down because they're so good, we're on a good path here tonight. So,
all right, good.
Now, I wouldn't dare use the C word because that is, I mean, here in the States, that's like using a racist term or something here.
Oh yeah. I know
if you want to get beat up by a group of women, go to somewhere with a crowd of women and use that C word, and you're probably going to die. But I will start.
I find that quite sad because I'm a feminist, and I actually consider that word to be very much a power word because I kind of think that. I mean, everybody uses dick and cock and all of this kind of stuff, and it's always kind of said. But let's be honest. I mean, a penis in comparison is nothing, absolutely nothing. And it's a power word. If anything, it should make, if you use it, then weak men tremble. So I think women should definitely start owning the word and start using it, as a part of their own dominance of power and free will and, go sisters and all of that. Plus, to be fair, I did grow up in Northern England. So actually, cunt is more of a compliment, really, than anything else.
Steph,
one of the reasons I wouldn't be allowed back into America.
Steph is away right now, and obviously we're doing the show. But as soon as she comes home, I'm going to call her a fucking quim and see what. I don't think she'll think anything of it, but that'll be my little joke until she figures out the word, looks it up, and then she'll beat the shit out of me. So I'm pretty excited about that because if I called her the C word. There's a good chance I'm going to die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, if you call her a quim, she might think it's some kind of hairstyle because it sounds like one. So that might work. I mean, it might last a good few months.
I'm going to try it. I'll let you guys know how it goes. I'm going to give that a whirl.
Moving away from genitalia, is the murder here yet?
Well, I mean, let's leave this as a progression. But let's go into. So obviously there's that. So the red light district. So for any of our listeners, if you're anywhere in an older city and you find Grope Lane, Lady Lane, the original name, you know what it was. Interestingly, though, something I was able to find in my research is that grope was actually a specific service you could actually pay for in a brothel. It was the cheapest thing you could pay for. And do we want to actually know what it was?
Nope.
Is that a no?
No.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll leave it there then.
No. Go on. Carry on.
Carry on.
Okay. So a grope, which we all get in a modern context, is copping a feel. Actually, then the cheapest thing you pay for in a brothel, and what you do, the custom was that you'd pay whatever little coppers that you had, You'd be allowed into the rooms when the prostitutes were sleeping in their private chambers that were usually on the top floor of the brothel. And then the idea was that you could either like have a sneaky look or a cheeky feel, and then you'd service yourself. And that was a grope. That was a good old-fashioned grope. Which, from what I'm able to find... and Anthony, have you ever heard, when you'll tend to hear like a somewhat more elderly lady, they'll tend to say this, and when they're trying to be a little bit more nice and a little bit more kind of distant and classy, and rather than referring to their a lady's happy place, vagina, they might nickname it and call it a tuppence. Have you heard that before? Yeah, tuppence. Well, from what I'm able to see and what I've been able to find, it seems that tuppence might actually come from the 2 pennies it was common to actually pay for a grope. So, the next time I hear a grandma or a nan say anything, oh, my tuppence, it's like, all right, no, nan, you're devaluing yourself. You need to, market yourself to a more modern market, have a bit of self-worth.
You know what I'm gonna make. I'm sorry. I'm stuck here on the C word, and I'm going to have Steph listen to the podcast, and where you explain the C word, and maybe she'll start letting me call her that. How exciting would that be?
Maybe wouldn't it be a wonderful day for all? Right. I mean, maybe not. Maybe not to call someone a cunt, but at least to be used. If we're talking equality, then surely we should be using it just as much as we say cock and balls and dick and all the rest of it.
Yeah. Oh, she calls me dick on a daily basis. Believe me.
Well, I mean, if that's specifically connected to your gender, well, then the opposite has to be true as well.
Yeah. No. Tony says I'm in for a shock. No, I'm going to get off the plane and I'm just going to start throwing that word out there at anything and everything and everybody. I can't wait. I'm sitting in a room by myself and I'm afraid to say it out loud. Okay. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe a window's cracked and somebody would hear it. Next thing I know, a woman's beating down the door. Because that's how Mike, it is here. You don't use that word.
You know what I'm going to do now, Mike?
What's that?
I'm going to drag you back. Come on now. Let's get away from that and back to murder, please.
Yeah, let's get into some gruesome. I want to hear about some entrails hanging around a pole and
all that kind of stuff. All right, let's get some disgusting gore and any of those kind of details. Well, London Bridge itself was very, very famous, specifically because of how ridiculously disgusting it actually was. If we're talking specifically murder, why don't we actually talk about state-sanctioned murder, executions? Because what London Bridge was very famous for was actually displaying the severed heads of those that had been executed. So famously, obviously, you got the Clink prison in Southwark. It's supposedly Britain's oldest prison. Not its oldest dungeon, mind, specifically prison, because that's a different thing. And then obviously all of the executions would be occurring there, but then also out in the Tower of London, famously. All the traitors, they'd be executed at the Tower of London. Their heads would actually be displayed on the bridge, on London Bridge, for all to see. I've actually got a phenomenal series of old illustrations, mostly Victorian. There are actually some that are from the 18th century, from around the area of Southwark. And one of the ones that I actually have is just of Borough High Street. That goes down connected to London Bridge today. And the London Bridge, the way it was, it had kind of two bastions, two kind of gatehouses that were stuck on either end of the bridge as you came onto it. And then in between, there were all these huge high-rise buildings with loads of shops in between, all crammed in. Obviously, it's not like that at all today. Now it's just a boring piece of concrete because it's not the original bridge. Actually, Mike, I believe you guys have the original London Bridge. It's out in America somewhere. I can't remember where. It was actually bought by a bit of an eccentric billionaire, and he decided to buy it for his local city or local town to ford over a river because it just happened to be the exact right measurements. So he bought it, and so London Bridge, the original, or as far back as we can get to the original, is actually with you guys at the moment.
Huh.
It was famous because it was littered with all the displayed heads and quartered bodies of all of those executed. And we go into some detail, all that in the tour, exploring it a bit more in terms of the techniques of torture and famously hung, drawn, and quartering, because the actual act of hung, drawn, and quartering is so much worse than it's ever given credit. If you've ever seen Braveheart, believe me, that is a tenth of how bad it actually was. But we've gladly explored those kind of details in as well.
Did I lose you?
Oh, no. Oh, no, I was
okay.
just giving an opportunity for you guys to chime in and explore anything. But actually,
just
staying on the subject of the bridge itself, I know obviously we've been exploring murder. Let's change the topic a little bit, but keep on to the theme of the bridge. Obviously, you guys know the nursery rhyme, London Bridge is falling down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite famous. So actually, London Bridge, the bridge itself, actually collapsed and burned down over many different occasions. One of the occasions where it actually burnt down or set on fire is actually believed to be directly related to the Thames. So one of the issues with all of these different settlements, because we think of London today, and I mean, first off, the only actual place that is genuinely London is the City of London. Everywhere else are just the boroughs of Greater London, but they are all cities in their own right. So Southwark is a city, Westminster is a city, Richmond is a city. They're also just a part of this metropolis, which we call the Greater Area of London. So unfortunately, if you say, "Oh, I'm going to visit London," well, actually, technically, you're not, unless you go to the City of London. But one of the issues that all these huge amounts of settlements and villages and towns and cities that were all built up around the riverbank, especially throughout the medieval era, they all had quite a common problem, and that was no effective sewage systems. So all of that just ends up spilling into the river, and obviously going out to tides, going out to sea. But there's an interesting issue, because where London Bridge is, obviously sits quite close to the corner of Southwark. So the way the land of Southwark is topographically in terms of connection to the river is it's not a flat embankment. The land itself actually sits kind of like a square into the river, like a square peninsula sticking in. So the river, the Thames, actually very narrowly meanders, it very tightly curves around the land of Southwark. So one of the issues of Southwark, aside from quite regular flooding, was actually that all these hundreds and thousands of tons of just human waste and crap and shit would just be floating down on a daily basis from all of these different towns and cities, and they would all be flooding into Southwark anytime there was a flood. But one of the other issues is that actually London Bridge itself, sometimes when the volume of shit was so bad, it would actually plug up the archways, because the old bridge actually used to have very tight archways, and it would sometimes plug up. And in the summertime, a lot of the Thames would actually dry up, and it would treacle. So huge mounds of crap would just be built up into these, stuck into the archways. And there's an account of when London Bridge burnt down, which no one's been able to find where the start point was, until someone made the suggestion that actually possibly rather than it actually starting from on top of the bridge, it's very more likely to have just been the huge amount of just human shit that had dried up in the summertime and then caught fire, because human crap is a fantastic source of fuel. In fact, if any of our listeners, if you're ever watching a film that involves a castle siege, or any kind of siege, and they famously, bring the oil, and they throw the oil over the battlements or over the gatehouse onto the enemy below, and you think it's boiling oil. Well, actually, it was almost never boiling oil. It was usually pitch, and it was pitch that was rendered with human shit. And they would boil this down into this very thick, tarry substance, and they would use that to then chuck onto the enemy. But then it's very flammable. It's incredibly flammable when you boil it down, when you concentrate it. So there's a really good chance that actually
you got to boil it down?
Yeah, so pitch itself is actually a kind of oily substance you commonly find on bogs. And what you do is you skim the surface of the water to collect the oil that's left on top.
Okay, I got it.
And then when you skim this down, you take that and then you boil it with the human crap, the human shit. And you boil this down, you keep boiling it, and it becomes, after a certain stage, it becomes like a very thick, tarry substance. But obviously, when you heat it up again, because it becomes like a tar, it becomes more liquid the hotter it gets. And that's very commonly what would actually be used to be chucked over. They'd also use things like rendered fat as well, if they had access to it. The Mongols, for example, during their sieges, they would very famously chop up the bodies of captured prisoners and then boil them down to render the fat to make their own pitch when they couldn't actually get access to it. And then obviously throw in all the human waste as well to boil it down, and then they've got their own version. So, if Genghis Khan wasn't horrible enough for you, that's another reason to find him even worse. But it was very common practice, and that's actually believed to be one of the reasons that, at least on one occasion, the London Bridge actually burnt down. So I'm not sure how dark your imagination is, but if you can think of something worse than burning alive in a firestorm fueled by human shit, then you've definitely got a dark imagination.
Yeah, when you asked, like, if we could be anywhere in history, my imagination, it's these beautiful women and, sex is free and open and these orgies with all these women. But in reality, I would go back in time and I would be the guy who scoops and boils all the shit down.
Oh, and absolutely.
And although that would be my job, that coincidentally would also be how I would die. Yeah.
Well, I mean, don't feel. Shit. I'm pretty sure it's how everybody would have died in most occasions. The night soilman. Oh, lovely job. Probably one of the worst jobs in history. Your job is literally to collect shit. All the cesspits that people would have in their houses outside in the outhouse, so they would basically have a huge hole in the ground and just fill it up with all the crap. And then the night soilman's job was literally to come over and collect the shit. But what we tend to forget a lot of the time is that that job of collecting shit and everything else, all these people that you're collecting the shit from, they're not even what could really be considered the ordinary poorer classes, because they're people that have got enough money to own enough property to even have a cesspit. So they would be the era's kind of equivalent to a middle class. Because one of the things we tend to forget a lot is that throughout most of human history, in terms of wealth, there's always been a ridiculously extreme disparity. The further back you go, the more disparity there is. The huge amount of wealth is concentrated into fewer and fewer people the further back in time you go. So when we think of I know in the States, when someone says middle class, that tends to be just kind of the general population, isn't it? Because when you talk about lower classes, it tends to mean people that are basically out of a job. They're unemployed, they're poor. Actually, here in the UK, when you say middle class, we have a class below that, which is working class. So if you have a job, if you're a working individual, you're referred to as working class. Middle class would be someone of a kind of educated background that would have some kind of position of authority, or not necessarily be rich, but they'd be earning well to live a very comfortable life. And that's someone that would be considered middle class. So someone who's like a bank manager. A bank manager would be middle class, for example, or a doctor, they would be middle class. Depending on, if they're a plastic surgeon, they're probably upper class because they got that much money. But and that's how it kind of works. But what we tend to forget is that the concept of like middle class, you were still living in absolute squalor. It was just, rather than living in knee-high crap, you were living in, ankle-high. So clearly you were having you're middle class. It's like, oh wow, you have a toilet. That's
right.
That's the kind of standard of quality of living that we're talking about, and it's something that we tend to forget, because you think of all these, you see all those images when you get something that's anything portraying medieval England, and you're wandering through a town, and you see like a lady out from the window, and she shouts "Gardaloo" because she's chucking the bucket out from the window with all the horribleness inside that spills onto the road. Well, we're kind of forgetting that woman, while we might be portraying her today as kind of disgusting and warting and everything, I mean, today that woman would be a CEO of a company, a big time earner, a very, very privileged professional. So ordinary people were living a far worse quality of life than that. It tends to be something that we tend to forget quite a lot.
We've got a question from one of the listeners, Andy Sampson. He asks, Is it right that part of the old hanging gibbet, and I presume this was at London Bridge, is kept at the convent near Tyburn?
The convent near Tiber, what, the Tiber in Rome?
That's the question, near the convent at Tyburn.
Sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Certainly. Is it right that part of the old hanging gibbet, and we were talking about London Bridge at the time, is kept at the convent near Tyburn?
Oh, Tyburn. Oh, no, actually, this isn't the first time I've heard about this. Because I know Tyburn's very famous because it had the Catholic martyrs. Because Tyburn used to be a village out, kind of in the area of Marble Arch today. And Tyburn is very famous, kind of the Hyde Park area, because it had a lot of the convent in Tyburn there, had a lot of very famous executed Catholic martyrs. I'm not sure about that, actually. I mean, it would be amazing if it's true, but I'm afraid I'm not entirely sure on that. I mean, very possibly. It's also very kind of difficult to make those kind of statements, because there were just so many gibbets that would be on kind of public display. It's kind of difficult to actually be able to specifically ascertain if it came from the one that was in London Bridge, because there would have been many on London Bridge. I'm assuming the one they're talking about is the more famous one that would usually be displayed on the, I believe it was on the south side of the river, on the southern bastion, on the South Gatehouse.
Are we? I'm sorry, real quick. Are we talking about testicles?
No, we're talking about gibbet.
Oh, are you thinking giblets?
Yeah, I thought.
Giblets. No, well, okay. Giblets are your mandules. Gibbet without the L is a kind of suspended cage where you have someone locked inside.
Okay.
It would be too tight for them to be able to sit down, so they'd have to be standing up, and it would be compressing the body into these kind of weird, horrible positions. Usually, a lot of time they were very basic, just very kind of loosely human shaped, but the idea was to be as uncomfortable as possible, but you'd never really be able to rest, because you'd never be able to put yourself in a comfortable position. You'd be locked in there for days, weeks, just many times just left to kind of starve to death, because a lot of the way that a lot of public executions would actually happen was they were very kind of pantry, kind of theatrical events. But when it came to these kind of punishments, the idea was that the severity of the punishment would be decided by the public at large. So if you were stuck in a gibbet, it wasn't necessarily a death sentence, because maybe you'd be told that you'd be stuck in there for like 2 weeks. But if the public aren't feeding you or giving you anything to drink in those 2 weeks, well, then you're going to die, and you're going to die in horrifically just terrible circumstances. But that was up to the people. So you hadn't been executed; you'd been left to die. So a lot, and that was the basis of a lot of these different kind of punishments. For example, the stocks, obviously very famous. The stocks you'd be stuck in the stocks. You know, the stocks are.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously very famous. You know, I mean, you'll see them everywhere. Well, the idea of the stock is usually out in the public square. You've also got to remember that you're left completely exposed to the elements as well. So hypothermia, dying of chill, they were very, very common things to do. But if you were locked in the stocks, obviously famously, like, people would pelt you, which I love the fact that in films they always show them as throwing cabbages and tomatoes when there's no way that anybody. One, tomatoes hadn't arrived, so no, that's definitely not on the cards. But no one would ever be wasting food at throwing at someone. No, they're going to be picking up some crap on the floor and throwing that instead, and rocks and stuff. So it's always a much more Disney kind of PG-rated thing when they show people throwing veg and stuff. It would be dependent on the public at large. So if you'd done something absolutely atrocious and you'd lost favor with the people, you'd be left to die. And that was the idea. It was also a way of... I think it was very much likely used as well, that if this was a punishment for some kind of insurrection or disobedience or lack of respect for authority, anybody helping you by insinuation would potentially be someone that was like-minded. So it seems to be quite a good strategy, quite a good tactic. If obviously, I'm really glad they don't do it anymore. But no, in terms of the actual gibbet itself, if it's actually in Tyburn, that would be phenomenal. I'm definitely going to check that up to see if that's true. But I can't answer yes or no on that one. I'm very sorry.
That's okay. Now,
hold on.
Go on.
I got a question before we move past that real quick. So, if you got put in a gibbet, did I say that right? Gibbet?
Yeah, gibbet or gibbet. I mean, it's one of those
Gibbet.
things we're not entirely sure how it was actually pronounced.
Okay,
Most
so
like-
if you got put in that, let's say it's summer versus winter. Do you know if they because 2 weeks in the winter you're going to die, where if you committed the crime and ended up in the summer you're going to probably live. I mean, did they adjust that for the time of year, or I mean, could the crime be considered a death sentence if you committed it when the weather's bad? Versus, do you give?
I mean, that's. In those scenarios, it's just kind of tough luck, really. You got to remember that we're talking about a time where human life was worth next to nothing. I mean, sadly, that's the kind of state of affairs for most of human history. Is that human life had very little value. It's more in today's world that we consider. The rights and, human rights and the concept of altruism. I mean, you got to remember that humanism as a movement started in the later part of the 16th century and didn't really take hold properly until, I'd argue probably the third wave Renaissance in the later part of the 18th century. And then even then, it wasn't until movements like, suffragettes and children's rights and things start happening in the later Victorians. So in terms of actually treating people with any kind of due consideration, that's a very recent development.
Right.
If you committed the crime in winter, I mean, that's not to say that, if you did have support from the public, that people wouldn't maybe give you a blanket or something to try and keep warm in some way. But that would entirely depend on the public.
Wow. I think we should go back to that. That's a good idea.
I mean, it depends on the crime. I mean, I'm pretty sure if we stuck a couple of bankers and a couple of gibbets stuck around, the Bank of England, I'm pretty sure that we would dry up a lot of those corruption scandals very quickly.
While I was looking into the show tonight, I came across, obviously, Jack the Ripper being the most famous of murderers, serial killers and such like in London. Another one I came up with was Serwin Antonovich Klasowski, better known as George Chapman.
Known as?
George Chapman. He was suggested that he was involved as Jack the Ripper, but he was also he killed 3 wives by poison, for instance.
I thought George Chapman was the famous dramatist from the 17th century. Oh no, I know who you're talking about. It's the Polish serial killer.
That's the one.
That's it. Yeah, he was a strangler. No, he was a poisoner. That's it. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah, okay. My mind had to click in there. It's kind of disturbing that I know off by hand. I know he died in Wandsworth Prison, I think.
That's correct.
He was hung, I believe. I know he was actually operating in a very, very similar time, I think. I think it was kind of like maybe the 1890s or 1880s, I think. So it's a very, very similar time to Jack the Ripper. I mean, I don't know. Maybe he was inspired.
Out of all these murderers, these people who have committed these crimes, what would be for you the standout, the worst of worst murders? Obviously, not the ones that are involved in the tour itself, but of all the tour, which would be the most graphic and gruesome murder that you could tell us about?
Oh, that is a question. Let me think. Gruesome. I mean, right now, the one that's actually coming to mind, it's not so much a specific murder in of itself. Oh, well, there's a phenomenal one. Okay, I've got 2 for you then. We'll start off with the first one that came to mind. Bonifacio VIII, Boniface VIII, who was a pope, actually very famously brought up because I think he's in the... you guys know Dario Fo, the dramatist, the theatre writer? Well, he actually in Mistero Buffo actually wrote a section on Pope Boniface VIII, where he is this kind of very comedic encounter where he's in this all regalia, dressing the Pope in all these jewels, and then he bumps into Christ as he's taking the cross up to the up on the hill. And he ends up in this weird exchange where he's trying to suck up to Jesus. And it's funny because Pope Boniface VIII is one of the most evil men in history. He was Pope in, I'm trying to remember now, it was the 1290s, early 1300s. He was Pope. I can't remember the specific date. He was famous because he hated the Franciscan order of monks. He was very much more standing with the Gregorians. Now, different orders of monks have different kind of beliefs in philosophies of life based on the saints that they dedicate their lives to. So the Franciscans is obviously Francesco of Assisi, and the Augustinians were of St. Augustine, and the Gregorians, obviously St. Gregory. So you got the different orders, and they all specialize in different things in different ways, but their beliefs, their core beliefs, are based on the lives and principles of their saints. But which is a bit of an issue because it meant that there were a lot of conflicts between different brotherhoods of monks having polar opposite beliefs. So the two prevailing order of monks at the times were the Franciscans and the Gregorians. And the Gregorians were very staunch, very, 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 very conservative, hard-wing fanatics. Fanatics is probably the wrong word, but they were very, very staunchly devout in terms of their concept of kind of puritanical belief that, everything is sin, every form of happiness, every kind of joy. They actually believed that laughing in itself was actually a form of sin, and that it was the work of the devil. So, clearly a lovely lot. I'm sure they would have loved listening to this podcast right now. But the Franciscans are very, very different. They were actually very, very joyous. They believed in kind of concepts of compassion and followed those kind of teachings. So very, very kind of polar opposites. But both Boniface VIII absolutely hated the Franciscan order of monks. And what he did, any occasion that he possibly could, was that he would just arrest them on heretical charges. And he was famous because he would actually nail the Franciscan monks on the doors, the gates of the Vatican itself, suspended by their tongues, bleeding out. It's actually a man so incredibly evil in all of his different, all the different things he actually involved himself, because he involved himself a lot in. He was the one who founded the concept of temporalism, which is the idea that the Pope is unquestionably the voice of God on earth. So whatever he says goes, and that's it. He was involved in a lot of the wars in France, Sicily, obviously Philip IV of France. And Albert of Germany, and it was actually led into those affairs very directly, actually causing some incredibly brutal conflicts. So a lot of what he did was just as an individual, he caused so much chaos and destruction and murder, violence all over the world. It's funny actually because he had a trial after he died. And he was accused of heresy and sodomy as well, because apparently he was homosexual, and he would have boys that would be invited into the Vatican. So at the same time, while he's condemning these Franciscan...
Real nice character there.
Yeah, exactly. He's condemning all these monks for laughing by nailing them alive onto the Vatican doors, but in the meantime, he's doing all the things that he was against. But he was so unpopular at the time. That Alighieri, Dante, while writing the Divine Comedy, he actually put him in the 8th circle of hell. But what's amazing about this is that he put him in the 8th circle of hell in the Divine Comedy, and obviously in the Inferno. He put him in there before he died. He was so evil. So it actually means that Pope Boniface VIII got to read the Divine Comedy and actually see himself in hell before he actually went there. So. A little nice happy tidbit.
Since we're doing this show, I'm going to give you a break real quick, and I'm going to tell you a story that's true. I over the 20 years, I've maybe lost some of the details, and I cannot recall his name. I would have to look it up, but I'm going to share a little story. So Let me think how to start this. Okay, so 20-some years ago in the county I grew up in and was still living at the time, this is Ohio, a woman's body parts started getting found in these three different, in the rural farmland in these three different counties. They found her head, her torso, a leg here, a leg there. She was spread out. And, you know, nobody knew who did it, what was going on. My mother worked in the office of a fairly large machine shop. And one day she actually worked in the machine shop. She did quality control. She had her, you know, an office where she kind of directed people to go test parts. And so she wasn't there. There was actually two buildings. One building had your offices and some machine shop. Well, she was on the one side. One day while she was at work, the FBI comes in, the police come in. They come in every entrance. And they grab a man who, he was a middle-aged school teacher, married with children, well-spoken, well-dressed. You know, my mom said he was a nice guy. Well, when it all comes out, this man, from what I recall, he had murdered her. I mean, it came out that he had murdered her. But also he had murdered other women in similar fashion. But, you know, he'd worked up to spreading the body parts out like that. And so very close to home. Well, to add to it, the story goes that as they're questioning the wife, you know, the wife is saying, you people are crazy. My husband's not a serial killer. And it wasn't until they started showing her tools that he had made to kill and dismember that she started to believe that this could be possible. But evidently at the machine shop my mother worked at, he had been making tools after hours to kill and dismember. Then, okay, so there's a little bit more to the story here real quick. So I would say a year or 2 years later, my brother owned a roofing company, small roofing company, and he'd go out and work on roofs, you know, redo roofs completely and everything. He got a call from a guy out of state. Hey, can you go to I don't live in state. I need you to go look at this house and tell me how much it'd be to fix the roof. He goes, you know, I don't know that I would want it replaced if I can get it fixed. I'm thinking about tearing it down. So my brother is suspecting to go out and find this old dilapidated house, you know, run down, everything else. Well, it's actually a very nice house. It's an old farmhouse. I mean, old for Ohio, probably mid 1800s. The barn sits directly on the road. I mean, you could literally, it's one of the only times I've ever seen anything. Driving down the road, you could probably reach your arm out and hit the barn. It's that close to the road. And there's no driveway. The house probably sits 20 yards off. It was just a weird situation. Well, so my brother goes and looks at the roof. He took his wife because he's just doing an estimate after a job. He'd picked her up. And she's standing down below while he gets up on the roof. And she goes, hey, I think I just saw somebody in the house. And my brother said, well, nobody's supposed to be here. Nobody lives here. The guy lives out of state, but knock on the door just to make sure so we're not, you know, scaring somebody. She knocked on the door and stuff. Nobody came to the door. Well, she looked in, and there were dishes, and very clean, very nice, well-kept house, but she looked in. There was dishes in the strainer. You know, it looked like somebody had just up and left or something. Well, it needed a few $100s in repairs. My brother called the guy and he said, you know, it would cost this much, or since nobody lives there, would you give me permission to hunt it? And he said, yeah, absolutely, and so he got permission we got permission to hunt it in return for my brother fixing that. Well, so as you're driving down the road, if you're heading east, and this is a road where it's so narrow, only one vehicle can go one way. I'm sorry I'm dragging this out. It kind of all comes together.
No, it's fascinating. Oh.
The house and then the barn sits right on the road. Then there's woods that go back, but it's not very wide. Maybe, from what I recall, maybe 75 yards. And then you come to one of those creepy old cemeteries out in the country, mid-1800s, with the wrought iron fence, that goes up above you, and it goes into this just I don't know, the whole area was kind of creepy. Well, between the barn and the cemetery, you could see where part of the fence had been taken back, and people had drove back in there. And when you walked back in there, where it ended was this big bare spot, probably 20 foot in diameter. I mean, bare. There wasn't a piece of brush. This is very thick woods. And in that spot, there was no brush, no trees, no nothing. There wasn't a tree anyhow, I'm sure, but there had been brush and stuff. I mean, there's brush everywhere. And, my brother said, I don't know, maybe it was a burn pile or something. And, well, I didn't go to it for a while. My brother had hunted it a few times, took one of our friends there. And that friend dealt with the public quite often. He owned a business. And so the first time I go there, we walk back there, and you get pretty far back in the woods. It expands out. When it's up by the road, it's not very wide, and then it expands out behind the house and everything. And there's this little cabin in the woods, and it's all grown up and everything else. And so we hunt, and we're walking back out, and I'm like on the side of the house. My brother is now in front of it, and I said, "Ooh, you ought to see if that door will open." And he said, "The door won't open. Lindsay and I tried it." And as I'm looking at it, I said, "Frank, I'm pretty sure it's open. I see a gap here. It looks like there's a gap." Now, I'm probably 20 yards away from it, and there's brush all grown up. And I said, and he goes, "Mike, I'm telling you, we tried opening it. It's locked or, rusted shut. The hinges were obviously of iron." And he said, "No, it's," and I'm like, "Just try it." And he goes up there and he's pissed at me. He's like, "I'm telling you it won't," and he opened it right up. So somebody had been, and not that is anything, but we mostly, what we wanted to hunt was deer. And what was really weird, there were no deer. This is a beautiful woods. And there's no deer. Matter of fact, there's not creatures in there. We never saw any deer. We would see them come up to the fence line at the back of the property and go around and through the cemetery. They would not, the deer wouldn't come through there. Well, a few more weeks pass, and Lindsay, one of his regular customers, he said, "Hey, I was out with a friend hunting out by where you live." And he goes, "Oh, no kidding, where at?" And he explained where it was at, and that guy said, "Oh, no kidding, that's where they found that lady's torso." And what I'm getting at is, I am telling you what, you could tell that property was tainted. I've never had such weird feelings and strong feelings. I grew up hunting and fishing outdoors, and I can tell you of 3 times in my life that I've been creeped out in the woods. Or places. I mean, because I went there several times, and each time it just didn't feel right. I've been in the woods long before the sun comes up, getting set up for when the deer start coming in. It's some of the most peaceful time in your life. And as I did it for the first time there, matter of fact, the only time, I was panicking inside. Something just felt so wrong about that property. And we never learned why, what happened. The house is still there, actually. I believe somebody bought it. But, did he live there when that happened? Did he have family that lived there? Somebody elderly and they just passed away? But it felt like somebody just up and left. And was it because of that? Or was something wrong with the property? I don't know, but I've never had such strong feelings in my life about something being so off and something being so wrong. You know what I mean? So that's my story and connected in a few different ways. But I'll tell you, it kind of started my fascination with serial killers and stuff because, I'm 6'3", 300 pounds. Okay. I'm a big guy. I'm a tough guy. I don't like to fight or anything, but I will if I have to. I'm not scared of much. But it sent chills down me to think of what kind of person could go carry a torso in the middle of the night into these woods next to this creepy cemetery. What is twisted in their head to be able to pull something like that off? You know what I mean? It's just a fascinating thing to me how just disturbed somebody can be. But that's my story. Dave, did I put you to sleep? I apologize, buddy.
No, I've been sat listening, obviously.
No, it was. Well, maybe the guy actually came across some right ergot, and just kind of went out of his mind. Do you guys right ergot? All right. So there's a prevailing theory. The Salem witch trials?
Yes.
So there's a kind of fungal spore. It's called right ergot. It's a fungal infection. It affects a lot of wheat and corn and stuff, and it releases these spores. But if you consume the spores, they're actually very psychotropic and even psychedelic as well. So there's a prevailing theory that actually right ergot is actually quite common in a lot of the kind of east coast of America, especially in the kind of farming belt regions. And one of the ideas of the Salem witch trials is that actually the people, the crops they were eating just got infected by right ergot, and they just hallucinated and just saw these witches and then thought they were real and then executed these innocent women. So you never know. Maybe you got some right ergot in the area that can, end up like bringing out some spores and making some people go a little bit crazy.
Right. I've never heard of it. So I don't know. But I don't think the guy who murdered that lady went crazy or anything like that. I mean, my mom worked with him, and up until the day the FBI came in, he was just a normal, nice, family guy who was a teacher. He worked there in the summers when he was out of school. But what transpired there completely, because I think we all have, and I think some of us are tuned into it more. We have, what's the word I'm looking for? Dave, I know you know what I'm saying. I guess our gut feeling, intuition, something tells me something more has gone on at that place.
Oh, yeah.
It just, something about it just set wrong with me long before we had any idea, about that incident. And very, very creepy. Very creepy. Yeah. You don't do talk, on your tours and stuff, you don't talk about Jack the Ripper and stuff.
Well, we don't talk about him specifically, no, because there's already quite a lot of really good tours on Jack the Ripper that already do him anyway. I mean, a lot of what we do is we're trying to showcase history that doesn't really get talked about as much.
Right.
Right. We're trying to showcase elements of history that maybe people didn't consider, and we just kind of portray things in a different way. But actually, interestingly, talking onto the Fringe, and obviously the killers, serial killers. The second one that I actually thought of before was Sawney Bean. I'm not sure if any of you ever heard of Sawney Bean. Mike Anthony, I'm not sure if you've ever come across Sawney Bean before. You heard the name?
I haven't.
No.
We lost Anthony.
Anthony went hours ago.
All right. All right, never mind. Oh, never mind. I thought he was still taking him. Oh, never mind.
Dave, we got Dave's the co-host. You're thinking Anthony. Yeah, that was on earlier.
Yeah, no. I thought he might. No. Obviously, I know David's there. But I just thought maybe Anthony was there because I know it's just. I realised that I haven't heard anything from Anthony, but he must have gone a while ago. What was it? Yeah. So Sonny Bean. So he was. He's somewhat of a mythical figure-ish. What we do know for sure is that the group themselves actually existed. They were in what's it called? Not in Loth. They were in Lothian, East Lothian, and they were a band, like a group of brigands. They actually formed like a clan of their own, about 50 people, and they used to rob merchants and travellers on the highways. They were highwaymen, essentially. Although most of the group were actually women, and Sonny Bean is supposed to be the leader. I'm not actually sure what his real first name was, but Sonny Bean himself led the gang. And what they were really different is because, Dave, you'll know this obviously about the the Border Reivers. It's a famous group of these kind of brigands that used to operate on the border countries between Scotland and England, just kind of robbing and burning and pillaging all over the place. Sonny Bean wasn't connected with that. So there's a lot of that kind of violence that's occurring on the borders that always has kind of been throughout most of British history. So between that conflict between Scotland and England and the border countries have always been rife with that kind of horrible history. But Sonny Bean himself, the gang, they used to rob people and the merchants and travellers travelling through. They went one step further because they were actually cannibals. They used to dispose of the bodies by eating them so they wouldn't leave any kind of evidence. And this went on for a very long time. I think it's estimated that nearly 1,000 people were actually killed by them.
Goodness.
Over their period of activity. No one really knows for sure how long they actually went on for, but at the end of it, some kind of big manhunt happened, and there's loads of different stories that go around it, setting it in somewhat different periods, and there are other groups that seem to be inspired by the same concept. And I mean, to be fair, if you've ever had haggis, I mean, if you actually eat that, sometimes cannibalism looks like a better option. So, I don't kind of blame anyone popping into that. But yeah, they were cannibals. They were robbing cannibals, and they used to dispose of the bodies by eating them. And they had a system, and it was a man called J.D. Henshaw, is the director of Sweet Venues when we were up in Edinburgh Fringe. He was an absolutely lovely guy. And he was the first one to tell me about the story, and I'd never heard of it before. And I ran into detail.
What time period are we talking?
I don't think there are any specific dates. I think it's around the 16th century is when it's kind of first reported. There's another version as well, which seems to be in the 18th century as well, like the early 18th century. I know that there was a group in around 1720 that was doing the same thing. Whether they're the same group or actually just a separate one, I'm not sure. But I know the ones that were Sonny Bean or Sonny is supposed to be the one where they killed like 1,000 people or thereabouts. And he used to eat them. He used to dispose of the bodies and get rid of them. But they had a practice where the people that they would rob and kill, if they had really young children, they would actually adopt the children. So they would actually bring them in and, teach them all those really important life skills.
Right. That's creepy. Scott Dubé wants to know, wants to ask, do you know, or was Jack the Ripper a cannibal? I don't think there was any cannibalism associated with.
No, there's nothing cannibalistic about it. I know. Obviously, he's very. What's renowned about him as a serial killer was that he had a very, very, very good knowledge of anatomy. Which is why there's prevailing theories about him potentially being a surgeon. There's another theory, actually, that he was a barber, because a lot of people tend to forget that barbers, on many occasions, were actually surgeons. That's why you get the title barber surgeon. And why, when you go to a barber's, it's the little spindle spiral that's white and red. The white and red streaks. You got a barber's. Well, it's because the barber surgeons, one of the things they used to do very commonly was bleeding. So in a lot of older forms of medicine, there was a philosophy of belief called the philosophy of the humours, which is this idea that the human body was made of these essential liquids called the humours, and all health was connected to these humours being kept in balance. That's why bleeding was the most common source of trying to cure you if you were healing of any kind of ailment, because blood was the most common of the humours. So the idea was that if you're feeling a bit sick, it's because you've got an imbalance in your humours, so they would bleed you because clearly you've got too much blood. So yeah, really, really scientific. The issue. Yeah, I know. But the barbers were the ones that most commonly used to do the bleedings. So the red and white that you get in the spirals is actually from the cloth that they would actually use to drain out the blood, and then they would wrap it on these spindles and then spin them, which is why you get the white and red. They would wash them out and try and drain out the blood. So you get the white ones that had been cleaned and then the red ones that were still trickling out. And that's why you get the red-white spindle that we still have today. But in terms of Jack the Ripper being a cannibal, I mean, potentially. I mean, I think he did keep trophies. I mean, he might have been doing a whole Hannibal Lecter thing where he's taking a kidney and then, a good old steak and kidney pie. I'm sure it's delicious. Although, actually, interestingly, is a friend of mine. She's a doctor. What do you call him? Is it an epidemiologist? Is that the title? Someone who specializes in tissues, epidermic tissues, skin tissues, and just any kind of tissues that are on the kind of surface. So not just skin, but everything below it and everything else. And she was telling me at one time, really disturbing, especially considering that she's a doctor. Apparently, the human flesh is the most nutritious thing that you can eat because it is absolutely perfectly balanced in terms of what the human body actually needs. All of the amino acids, all of the the protein chains are all in the right consistency, because when you eat meat or any kind of protein, it needs to be broken down into simpler amino acids to then be kind of reconstructed into the protein chains that you actually need. But human flesh is already pretty much exactly what you need, so very little work needs to be done into it. And then it's got all the right mineral content, it's got all the right vitamin-rich levels as well, if as long as you don't cook it too hard. And apparently, because of the way that our tongues work in terms of flavor balancing, the reason that we tend to like some foods over others is because of how close it is to essential nutrition that we would need. It's the reason that we like really sugary and fatty things, is because they're the things that will guarantee to keep you alive. If you're going to be going through a series of period where you're going to be not eating for a while, the very high-calorie foods are the stuff that's going to be able to go to your fat stores to not only keep you alive, so the body rewards you by making taste really good.
So what you're saying is human meat would probably taste delicious?
Yeah, apparently, by that logic and that concept, according to my doctor friend, which again, really disturbing, would actually mean that, yeah, human flesh should actually be by far the most delicious, which also explains why pork, bacon, it's so good, because it's actually the closest to human flesh. In fact, isn't there one of those tribes that they're still around today, and I can't remember the name of them. Really famous. Is it on the? I think it's in Zambia. No, I can't remember. But I know they call it long pig. Human flesh. It's called long. And that's how they describe it. And it's one of these. I believe they still exist. I don't want to drop a name. Is it the Zambezi tribe on the Zambezi River? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I
really
think
hate the name of like an entire community of people and going, oh yeah, they're cannibals, and then they just turn around and going, well, we're vegetarian, and then I don't want to. So if you are a Zambezi, I apologize if I've dropped you into that one, because it's probably not right. But I do know, yeah, there's a tribe somewhere that they would describe it as long pig, because that's apparently the good description of human flesh.
Well, I want to say in the teens and 20s, Albert Fish here in the United States, I want to say New York area, New Jersey, Brooklyn. He was a cannibal. He was a serial killer cannibal.
Oh, well, what did he say about the meat? How did he say it tasted?
I don't know. I have no clue. I never. He actually, I think, if I remember the story correctly, he he killed a little girl and ate her. Like, that was when he got caught. He had taken her to a... He was really disturbed. He was known for cutting people's buttocks, and eating them. And he was quite disturbed. He grew up in a foster home, or not foster home, in an orphanage, and got a lot of beatings. And he would beat people, so he was kind of, he was one of the original really sadistic, kind of bondage kind of things, really turned into just a really crazy.
Just a really special guy, yes. One of those kind of people. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, gents, it's 10 o'clock. I've got to get up very early for work tomorrow. Can I ask before we go, Carrie, obviously, to tell us about the tour? When, where, what price, what times? How do you book a tour when you're in London?
Oh, right. So you just go to our website, www.thecloakandaggertour.com. I'm sure, to be fair, if you Google us, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find us nice and easy. The tour runs on the weekends, so every Saturday and Sunday. We do some occasional weekdays, but very rarely. The whole experience is about 2.5 hours-ish, around thereabouts. Obviously, we start in a pub, so turn up a little bit early and grab a lovely drink at the George. Just Google the George Inn, absolutely stunning venue, absolutely beautiful. So great place to get drunk and then immerse yourself in history. And then get drunk when you come back to go and see the show. So it's kind of the birthday come.
Sounds like a blast.
Yeah, exactly, right? It's murder, mayhem, gore, destruction, theater, and alcohol. It's like a dream combination.
I was very sad. I don't know how that could get any better.
And we even say the word cunt. So if that doesn't bring you on board, then what will? It starts at 7:30, so if you do turn up, make sure to arrive a little bit before, because that's when the group sets off. And actually, in honor of you guys, I've actually made a little promotion code as well. So if anybody comes on the tour and they book online, if you just type in the code archaeology, then you'll get a 20% discount.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Good deal.
And I'll be probably taking you that up on that even when I get to London soon, and I definitely want to come on that tour.
Oh, definitely. Well, you need to come on. We're going to have you as our guest and discuss you in all the possible ways. And I think the goal of mine is to try and get you to throw up and see how well I do.
That'll be the beer that does that before we start.
Well, I think the beer is the one thing that's going to keep you stable throughout the experience. But don't underestimate how horrible this actually gets. It gets.
You haven't met me. You haven't met me.
All right,
you're not going to bother that guy.
Perfect person to come on the tour.
Carrie, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Yeah.
Guys,
and also, before we go, obviously, can we also remind listeners that the MagFest information can be found at Black Country Magnetism Facebook group or the Dipper Dudes Adventure Facebook group. And I'm also right in saying there's a Facebook page for the Cloak and Dagger tours.
Yeah, we do. And just remember, guys, if you do book on the tour, if anyone that's listening wants to come and see some horrible history, make sure to use that code archaeology and you'll get a nice 20% discount. And normally the full price is £15, and obviously you get the 20% off that.
Brilliant.
Right.
Yeah, that is great. Thank you so much for coming on, and good night, guys. Thanks to all the listeners. Hope you enjoyed the show.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
No, have a lovely night. Thank you, guys.
The Archaeology and Metal Detecting magazine acts as a hub for information, offering articles from archaeologists, detectorists and other specialists throughout the genre, featuring many links, event info and news articles associated to archaeology and metal detecting. We also offer professional review services and promotion for books, resources, videos, documentaries, gadgets, equipment and much, much more. The magazine is run by the archaeological and metal detecting community for the archaeological and metal detecting community. So come visit us at archmdmag.com, that's archmdmag.com, and check out information from our media section with all the latest content, news from the Archaeology Channel, podcast, and the YouTube channels that feature the now legendary Digger Dawn, the Man with the Hat, and Archeo Duck, just to name a few. If you would like to offer an article, link, or inquire about other services, then pay us a visit at archmdmag.com and drop us a line.